Imagine walking through the opulent halls of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. The tile work is mesmerizing, the gardens are lush, and the scent of exotic spices fills the air. It looks like paradise on earth. But for centuries, beneath this veneer of gold and silk, lay a machinery of justice so terrifying that the mere mention of it would silence entire rooms. The Ottoman Empire, which spanned over 600 years and 3 continents, was a beacon of culture, science, and military might. But keeping an empire of that size together required absolute order, and the Ottomans believed that order was best maintained through absolute fear. We aren't just talking about simple imprisonment or fines. We are talking about a legal system that turned the act of punishment into a theatrical, psychological, and physically devastating art form. From the silence of the executioner to the dark waters of the Bosphorus, the methods used to discipline criminals, traitors, and even royalty were designed to send a message that would echo through history. You might think you know about medieval torture, but the Ottomans had specific, ritualistic ways of ending lives that are unlike anything else in the history books. So, brace yourself. We are about to open the darker pages of history to reveal the brutal reality of Ottoman justice. When we think of royalty, we usually imagine a life of luxury and safety. But in the Ottoman Empire, being born a prince was often a death sentence. This brings us to perhaps the most cold-blooded political policy in human history, the law of fratricide. Unlike European monarchies where the eldest son automatically inherited the throne, the Ottoman succession was a free-for-all. Any son of the Sultan had a claim. This often led to devastating civil wars that weakened the state. To solve this, Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror, the man who took Constantinople, codified a chilling law. It stated, "Whichever of my sons inherits the Sultan's throne, it behooves him to kill his brothers in the interest of the world order." This wasn't murder, it was state policy. The moment a new sultan was crowned, his first official act was often to order the execution of all his male siblings. We are talking about brothers, sometimes mere infants, being strangled in their cribs. The logic was ruthless but effective. It was better for a few princes to die than for thousands of soldiers and civilians to perish in a civil war. This practice continued for centuries. In one particularly gruesome instance in 1595, Sultan Mehmed III had 19 of his brothers executed in a single night. The next day, the citizens of Istanbul watched in horrified silence as 19 small coffins were carried out of the palace. It remains one of the darkest stains on the imperial lineage, proving that in the Ottoman court, family was the most dangerous enemy of all. While the common criminal might face the axe or the sword, the Ottomans had a very specific superstition regarding the aristocracy and the royal family. Noble blood was sacred and could not be spilled on the ground. To spill the blood of a royal or a high-ranking pasha was considered a bad omen that could curse the land. So, how do you execute a powerful rival without shedding a drop of blood? You use the silken bowstring. This method was reserved for the elite grand viziers, pashas, and the unfortunate princes we just mentioned. The executioners were often huge, muscular men chosen for their strength. However, there was a twist: they were often deaf-mutes. The sultans preferred deaf-mute servants for these grim tasks because they could not hear the pleas of the condemned, nor could they reveal the secrets they witnessed within the palace walls. The procedure was swift but terrifying. The executioner would approach the victim, often in their own chambers or a secluded palace room, carrying a greased bowstring made of silk. The silk was strong but soft enough not to cut the skin. Within seconds, the cord was tightened around the neck. It was a silent death. There was no guillotine blade dropping, no crowd cheering, just the quiet struggle in a candlelit room. The body would then be presented to the public or the sultan, perfectly intact, with no blood spilled, adhering strictly to the mystical laws of the empire while brutally eliminating the threat. Moving away from the elite and toward the common people and soldiers, we find a punishment that was far more widespread and arguably more painful in the long run: the falaka, also known as the bastinado. This wasn't an execution method, but a form of corporal punishment designed to inflict maximum pain without necessarily killing the victim, though many wished they were dead by the end of it. The falaka involved securing the victim's feet in a wooden device that held the soles upward and rigid. Two men would hold the device while a third rained down blows on the bare soles of the feet using a thick rod, a bullwhip, or a bundle of birch branches. The feet are incredibly sensitive, packed with nerve endings. The initial pain is blinding, but the aftereffects are where the true horror lies. The tissue in the feet would be pulverized. Bones were often crushed. After the beating, the victim wasn't allowed to rest. In a cruel twist, they were often forced to run or walk immediately afterward to prevent the blood from pooling and causing gangrene, which was agonizing on the swollen, broken flesh. Victims of a severe falaka often never walked properly again, left crippled for life. It was a favored punishment for janissaries, the elite soldiers, or unruly students, serving as a permanent, limping reminder to everyone else to follow the rules. If you look at paintings of the Bosphorus straight from the Ottoman era, it looks romantic and peaceful. But beneath those dark, swirling currents lie the secrets of the harem. The Ottoman harem was a distinct political entity with its own hierarchy, but it was also a gilded cage. When a woman of the harem, be it a concubine or a servant, was accused of adultery, treason, or sorcery, her punishment was often the sack. This method is exactly what it sounds like, and it is the stuff of nightmares. The condemned woman would be bound and placed inside a heavy leather or weighted sack. Sometimes, to ensure the job was done, the executioner would also place a cat or a viper inside the sack with her, adding a layer of frantic terror to the suffocation. The mouth of the sack was sewn shut. Under the cover of darkness, a small boat would row out into the middle of the Bosphorus. The sack would be tipped over the edge, sinking rapidly into the deep, cold currents connecting Europe and Asia. There was no burial, no marker, and no record. The person simply ceased to exist. It was a method of erasure as much as execution. It was famously said by observers of the time that the fish of the Bosphorus are fat, a grim allusion to the number of silent executions that took place in those waters. When we hear the word impalement, we almost immediately think of Vlad the Impaler, Dracula, but we have to remember that Vlad spent his youth as a hostage in the Ottoman court. He learned this horrific method from the Ottomans themselves. Impalement was the ultimate psychological weapon, used primarily during wartime or against rebels to terrify the enemy into submission. The Ottoman method of impalement was anatomically precise and scientifically calculated to prolong suffering. The victim was not just stabbed, a greased, rounded stake was inserted into the body. The executioners were skilled experts who knew exactly how to navigate the stake along the spine, avoiding major organs like the heart or liver. The goal was not to kill the victim immediately. Once the stake was driven through and exited near the neck or shoulders, it was planted vertically in the ground. Because vital organs were spared, the victim could remain alive, writhing in agony, for hours or even days. These stakes were often lined up in the hundreds or thousands along highways leading to a city. Imagine being an invading soldier and marching past miles of your captured comrades, still alive and groaning on stakes. It was effective. Many armies simply turned around and fled rather than face the wrath of the Ottoman war machine. If impalement was about slow precision, gaunching was about gravity and chance. This punishment was largely reserved for thieves or those who disrupted the social order in the cities. It was a public spectacle intended to be watched by the masses in the marketplace. A high gallows or platform would be constructed, and beneath it, a series of massive, sharp metal hooks were embedded into a beam or hanging from chains. The executioner would hoist the victim up by a rope and then simply cut the cord. The victim would fall onto the hooks. The horror of gaunching lay in the randomness. Depending on how the victim landed, they might die instantly if a hook pierced a vital organ. However, more often than not, the hooks would catch a leg, an arm, or the ribcage. The victim would be left hanging there, suspended by their own flesh. They weren't taken down. They were left to hang until they died from blood loss, shock, or thirst. Passers-by would go about their daily shopping while a man groaned on a hook above them. It was a brutal normalization of violence intended to keep the crime rate in the capital notoriously low. The imperial gate, or Bab H Mayan, is the main entrance to the Topkapi Palace. Today, tourists snap selfies there. But 300 years ago, that gate was the empire's trophy case. The Ottomans didn't believe in hiding the results of their justice. When a rebel leader, a corrupt governor, or a bandit was executed, their head was sent to Istanbul. These heads were then treated to preserve them stuffed with straw or honey to prevent immediate rot and placed in niches or on spikes right at the front gate. It was a grisly message board. Next to the head, a placard would be placed detailing the crimes committed. This practice was so common that the palace had dedicated staff just to manage the display. There was even a specific fountain near the gate, known as the executioner's fountain, where the royal executioner would wash his sword and hands after a beheading. The proximity of the Sultan's splendor to the rotting heads of his enemies created a stark contrast: inside the walls, absolute beauty; outside the walls, absolute death. It reinforced the idea that the Sultan held the power of life and death in the palm of his hand. Among all these tales of horror, there is one Ottoman custom that is so bizarre it almost sounds like folklore, but it was real. It was a unique loophole in the judicial system for high-ranking officials, specifically the Grand Vizier. It was called the fatal race. When a high official was summoned by the Sultan to answer for a failure, he would be offered a cup of sherbet, a sweet fruit drink. If the sherbet was white, the Sultan had granted him mercy. If the sherbet was red, it meant death. However, simply drinking it wasn't the end. Upon seeing the red sherbet, the official had one chance. He had to run. The official would sprint from the palace kiosk through the gardens toward the fish market gate. The head gardener, who curiously also served as the chief executioner, would give him a small head start and then chase him. If the official made it to the gate before the executioner, his sentence was commuted from death to exile. He would be banished, but he would keep his head. If the executioner caught him, he was strangled right there in the garden. Imagine the adrenaline, the absurdity, and the terror of a middle-aged bureaucrat sprinting through the royal gardens, knowing his life depended entirely on his cardio. Finally, we must talk about the punishment of an entire class of people. The Janissaries were the elite infantry units, the household troops of the Sultan, and the first modern standing army in Europe. For centuries, they were the pride of the empire. But over time, they became corrupt, powerful, and dangerous, often overthrowing sultans they didn't like. In 1826, Sultan Mahmud II decided he had had enough. He didn't just punish individuals, he orchestrated the Vaka-i-Hayrai, or the auspicious incident. When the Janissaries revolted, as the Sultan expected they would, he was ready. He didn't send in police, he wheeled out the heavy artillery. The Sultan's loyal new troops surrounded the Janissary barracks in Istanbul and opened fire with cannons. The wooden barracks were set ablaze with thousands of soldiers trapped inside. Those who managed to escape the flames were hunted down in the streets and executed on the spot. The Bosphorus was reportedly clogged with bodies. In a matter of days, the strongest military unit in the empire was liquidated, burned, and erased from history. It was the ultimate punishment, not just the death of men, but the death of an institution and an identity. The Ottoman Empire was a place of immense beauty, deep culture, and profound architectural achievement. But it was also a place where the sword was never far from the neck. These punishments, ranging from the silent bowstring to the public horror of the hooks, served a singular purpose: to maintain the absolute authority of the Sultan in a world that was constantly trying to tear the empire apart. It's easy to judge history by modern standards, but in the context of the time, these methods were the glue that held a massive, multi-ethnic empire together for 6 centuries. They were calculated, theatrical, and terrifyingly effective. I want to hear from you. Which of these methods did you find the most disturbing? Was it the silence of the silken bowstring or the randomness of the gaunching hooks? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dive into the darker side of history, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.